Good morning, everyone. Thank y'all for joining me on this lovely Friday morning. So, we are going to read together. We are going to read a chapter from a Christian romance novel. I guess I can call it romance. I know the people grow individually, and that's one of the reasons why I love reading books by this author. I feel like I even grow when I read her books. And yeah, I've read two of her books so far. I've read um Mirrored Hearts and I've read A Place for My Heart. So today I am going to read Shades of the Heart. It is by Anne Marie Bryan. And yeah, I started reading it before I got to page 20, but today I'm going to read the first chapter with all of you. And I'm going to read on Kindle so you guys can read along. I'm so excited about this. Let's get started. Okay, y'all, I've got my trusty screen recorder going, and here we are, Shades of the Heart. I cannot wait to get started. Encounters of the Heart series, book 1. And I believe she puts this scripture in every one of her books. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Is not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Amen. Okay, prologue. Up in smoke. Blake glanced at his watch and noticed it was 11:06 a.m. He decided then and there he was taking an early lunch. Come now or swing by during lunch, she had said. The gentle sound of her voice had created a heated stir in his body, causing his heart to pick up speed. Grabbing his work bag from the floor, he moved quickly through his office door, closed it behind him, and informed his executive assistant he would be out for a while. He quenched the urge to bolt for the main door to the office. What would my staff think? Instead, he walked swiftly across the carpeted floor, attempting to contain the butterflies that monopolized his stomach. His deep baritone voice rang out as he responded to greetings from members of his staff. Outside the main door to the office, he walked across the tiled floor of the brightly lit foyer to the row of elevators on the 25th floor at Petrosta International Bank's headquarters. A few minutes later, he exited through the revolving doors of the building and sprinted across the parking lot to his black BMW. Blake Montgomery was a man on a mission. Smiling, he pulled out of the parking lot, seemingly oblivious of the magnificent skyscrapers, the huge electronic billboards, and the many tourist attractions in the bustling commercial hub of Orlando, Florida, where he spent most of his workdays. He had been waiting for her call, almost anxiously awaiting the news. He just knew she was planning to break the news in an extraordinary way. After all, Gabrielle was a master at planning mystery dates, and she tricked him into coming home for lunch several times. She was like that. His smile widened as he reminisced about their fulfilling lunch dates. I'm keeping love alive, she had teased after one of their lunch hour rendezvous. Half an hour later, he brought his car to a screeching halt in front of a sprawling estate home with a three-car garage and beautiful tropical landscaping. His tie, excuse me, his tie caught in the car door as he slammed it shut. Not today, he muttered, hastily releasing himself. He ran towards the front door and swung it open. Honey, I'm home, he yelled, dropping his work bag behind the closed door. In the living room, dear, Gabrielle responded. Blake was beside himself with excitement. He had run at least one stoplight to get home. Smiling, he made a dash for the living room and came face to face with Gabrielle, perched on the edge of the couch. Throwing his car keys on the coffee table, he plopped down beside her, grabbed her shoulders, and turned her to face him. Okay, break it to me gently. Gabrielle fidgeted with the wedding band on her finger, mixed feelings about the news still swirling her head. Finally, she looked in Blake's smiling face, dread twisting her features. Larry, we. Then she finally got it out. I slept with Larry. Time stood still as her words reverberated in his head with each passing second. What? Blake stammered with unbelieving eyes. He must not have heard her right, but her distraught countenance assured him that he did. I am so sorry, she muttered, gazing at the floor. Loud voices whirled in Blake's head, his heart hammering loudly against the wall of his chest, and he opened his mouth, but no words came out. Dazed, the dead weight of his limbs caused him to fall backward on the cushions of the sofa. As if that wasn't enough, she turned the dagger, crushing his already wounded heart. I have I have a sexually transmitted disease. Chlamydia. She filled in, still avoiding his eyes. You need to check yourself. His ears were filled with the loud gushing sound of his pounding heart. The clam. He shot up from the sofa, sat down again, grabbed her by the shoulders, and began mercilessly shaking her. This must be some kind of sick joke. Stop! Gabrielle cried out, feeling as if she was about to be snapped in half. He released her suddenly and let out a gut wrenching cry, collapsing on the sofa. Then, in a fit of rage, he shot up from the sofa, almost knocking over the coffee table as he stormed out of the living room. Gabrielle reached out a hand to touch him, but stopped short when he wheeled and glared at her, hurling, "Get away from me," before moving on. She ran after him. "I need help, Blake," she whispered, her voice diffused with tears. "You know I love you." "Leave me alone, Gabby," he spat out, reaching for a drinking glass in the kitchen cupboard. "You need help, all right." But it didn't matter to him. She had hurt him to the core of his being. The anger he felt threatened to explode. "Say you hate me. At least that will make me feel better." "I'm sorry." Blake glared at her, trying to stop his mind from racing with violent thoughts he didn't know he possessed. "No, don't apologize," he growled, holding up his hand. "You knew what you were doing." He could barely stand to look at her. He clamped his jaws tight to bite back a bitter retort as he filled the glass with water from the refrigerator. What else was she hiding? He knew she was going to see her gynecologist that morning, and he wanted to accompany her to hear the good news that they were pregnant. She had finally agreed that this was the year for them to start a family, and he was hoping today he'd hear the good news that God had blessed their union with a child. He wanted a son, but nevertheless, he'd take a daughter. So much for the good news. Instead, he'd have to get a checkup. A checkup? He wanted to check out. He poured the water down his throat, then slammed the glass on the cupboard and stormed out of the kitchen. "Blake!" Gabrielle's heart wrenching cry stopped him in his track at the entryway leading to the front door. He grunted and spun around to face her. "What?" She lowered her gaze. She'd never seen him look at her like that, with contempt and disgust. "Please say something," she begged. His jaw hardened. "Like what, Gabby? Like it's okay to sleep with Larry Canati?" He reached for her for a moment. "Oh, y'all, my screen recorder loves to pop up ads." His jaw hardened. "Like what, Gabby? Like it's okay to sleep with Larry Canati?" He watched her for a moment. "What were you trying to do? Sleep your way to the top?" His words pierced her heart, sending feelings of deep regret racing through her. "I'm sorry," she said, clutching her hands like a wounded animal. He gave her a cold, contemptuous glare. He had never felt so unprepared in his entire 38 years on Earth. Nothing, absolutely nothing prepared him for her revelation. He veered back to the living room to get his car keys. "He took advantage of me," she whimpered behind him. Blake dropped on the small sofa and eyeballed her. "Did he rape you, Gabby?" He, he, exactly. I didn't think so. It wasn't like that, she pleaded, kneeling before him and wiping her bloodshot eyes. "It only happened once, the day after you left for Atlanta. I had a moment of weakness and Larry took advantage of." She paused, seemingly at a loss for words. "Moment of weakness?" Blake snapped. He stood and threw his hands in the air, looking down at her. "How many other moments of weakness have you had with other men?" Gabrielle flinched, her head bowed towards her chest, and tears dripped off her chin. "Don't say that. You know I'm not like that. I am so sorry. I was feeling so—" "Jeez, Gabby," Blake hissed. "Why did you have to sleep with another man? We have a great sex life." His eyes stung with pent-up fury. Watery eyes met his. "We do, Blake. I didn't sleep with him. He forced me." Blake barely moved a muscle. "It's now spring, Gabby. Spring. This happened 6 weeks ago. Were you even going to mention it if you didn't get chlamydia?" He folded his hands across his chest and stared at her. "Let me make sure I get this. You said that Larry forced you, yet you didn't mention it to me. Not once. What is going on with you, Gabby?" A strangled sob escaped Gabrielle, and her slender frame hunched in shame. "Help me, Lord. How can I even begin to explain that the weight of my past has finally caught up with me?" Gabby, don't. He had heard enough. Enough of her pitiful explanation. "This is not what I signed up for," he said, snatching his car keys from the coffee table. He all but bolted from the front door as the crackling sounds coming from his shattered heart whipped into a frightening, spiraling frenzy. Gabrielle sprang from the floor. "Please don't go," she cried out, her features twisted in anguish. But Blake didn't look back. He just needed to get out of there. He wanted to be anywhere but in her presence. Thoughts of the many times she smiled at him and uttered the words, "I love you," ricocheted through his mind. Tears threatened as he recalled telling her that he reserved the word adore to describe his feelings toward God, but he was only going to use it this once with her. "I adore you," he told her, smiling as he looked deeply into her beautiful light brown eyes after watching the magnificent sunset on a beach in Jamaica on their first anniversary. "Blake, please don't leave," Gabrielle crawled out, trying to stop him before he opened the front door. In desperation, she threw herself on his back, her hands clasping his waist. "Please, please don't leave me." She pressed her head to the back of his neck, her tears dripping on his shirt. His heart softened, but in the next minute, his mind unleashed images of her and Larry Canati making out all over her office, the desk, the sofa, and the floor. He stiffened, his hand gripping the door handle. "Let go of me." "Blake, please," she begged. "Please don't leave me." But all he heard was the chanting in his head. It was getting louder and louder by the second. Thousands of voices chanting, "Betrayal, betrayal, betrayal." Without saying a word, he turned around and put her away from him. A cool blast of air surged in as he swung the house door open. With tears streaming down his face, he slammed the door behind him, and with the click of the lock, he shut Gabrielle out of his life. "No!" Gabrielle cried out, crumbling to the floor. The pain in her heart hit an unbearable level, and grief consumed her soul as the clicking of the lock reverberated in her ears. All right, y'all, let's read chapter 1 together, and then I'm going to finish this story on my own and come back later, sometime maybe mid-August, sooner if I finish it before then, and give you guys a review of the book. Chapter 1, Taking It Back. 7 months later. A muffled groan emanated from Gabrielle's sorry, y'all, sometimes I can't say my R's well. Puckered lips as she dropped the basket of dirty laundry on top of the washing machine. "Not in the mood to do laundry, and this rain is not making it any easier," she mused, glancing out the window. "Did not expect all this rain to kick off the fall season." A flash of lightning illuminated the laundry room, followed by the rumbling of thunder, and she quickly closed the curtains. She sighed deeply, contemplating her next move when a glimmer of light reflected on her diamond weather band as her hand rested on the laundry basket. She held up her hand and thoughtfully gazed at her wedding ring. Will I ever get past losing Blake? Her heart burned with trepidation, and she gulped a deep breath to keep full-fledged panic at bay. Feeling nostalgic, she headed to her bedroom. Since her separation from Blake, her mind felt like a battlefield. She was constantly putting out one fiery mental attack after another. Granted, she faced her fair share of hard knocks in life and had cultivated a protective shell, but this one was different. She had had a hand in her downfall. A major hand at that. Her countenance seemed to condemn her as she walked past the dresser and caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Her light brown eyes stared back at her, empty and sad. Will my heart ever recover? The unhappiness seemed to be eating at her heart, and no doubt would begin to peel away at her core if she did not get a firm grip on her life. Flopping backwards on the gold ruffled bed cover, she encouraged herself. Stay strong, girl. The Lord is perfecting that which concerns you. Y'all, sorry, that was my husband. She had laid in bed way too late that Saturday morning, whispering fervent prayers, asking God again to save their marriage. She prayed that her infidelity had not permanently destroyed their union. She remained hopeful since Blake had not filed for a divorce, even though he had moved out. A sharp pain slowly screeched through her heart as she remembered how Blake desperately wanted to start a family. "Let's start discussing names," he said. His dark brown eyes twinkled as he spoke during their devotion one night as they lay facing each other in bed. She looked at him, taking in the flawlessness of his chiseled features. Handsome would not aptly describe him, with his caramel complexion, well-toned muscular body suggesting years of working out, and his signature gap-toothed smile which seemed to say, "The world is a better place because you are in it." He was one tall, good-looking man. "Gabby," Blake called out when he noticed that she was staring, "do I have something on my face?" "No." She smiled tenderly at him, caressing his cheek with her hands. "I love you." He returned her smile, pulling her into his arms and dotting her face with kisses, before covering her lips with his own. He kissed her leisurely, then urgently, until she arched tightly against him, moaning loudly. Her toes curled, and she feverishly clutched his shoulders, quivering and wanting more, demanding more. And he gave her more, but not before ripping his lips from hers to say, I love you. He understood her well enough to know how to give her the greatest pleasure. She would venture to say he mastered it, and thankfully, it was his pleasure too. His rapidly rising desire was as powerful and insatiable as hers. Every moment with him hurled her into a blissful, heated dimension, leaving her feeling completely spent yet breathlessly fulfilled. She had no doubt that Blake loved her completely. He never failed to let her know. He had displayed only love and deep admiration for her during their marriage, and many times he had calmed her fears with loving kindness. But she could not get rid of the feelings of inadequacy that assailed her because of horrible childhood memories. She let out a sigh of regret and pain, thinking again about the fateful day when their marriage fell apart, simply shattered before her eyes. Everything about that day was still vivid in her mind. Early that morning, Dr. Pedro Ryan's assistant had called and told her to visit the office as soon as possible. She had known that something was wrong because she had been experiencing painful urination and lower abdominal pain. Blake wanted to accompany her to see Dr. Ryan, thinking she was pregnant, but she had insisted that it was only a routine checkup and would call him with the diagnosis. He had no idea she had visited Dr. Ryan's office the previous day and was about to pick up her test result. A chill shot through her as the memory of Dr. Ryan's announcement flashed to the forefront of her mind. She had hung her head in shame when he said, You, my dear lady, have chlamydia. Her heart sank further by the minute as her doctor droned on about the danger of having the disease. However, he quickly reassured her it was curable and that it didn't do any harm to her reproductive system. But it was Dr. Ryan's next statement that had caused her to burst into tears. Your husband needs to check himself. That day, she had decided that going to work was not an option, so she headed home blinded by tears while agonizing about how to relay the news to Blake. The only news he was prepared to hear was, We are pregnant. Surely this was devastating news that would destroy their marriage. Her heart sagged under the weight of the situation, and she had contemplated if even she could survive this unwelcome news. When she arrived home, she prayed, refusing to let despair claim her thoughts. Then she placed a call to Blake. She wished she could tell him over the phone, but immediately knew that it would be a bad idea. Instead, she had told him to come now or swing by during lunch, all the time hoping that the truth would not destroy him. Kneeling at the sofa in the living room, she prayed a second time and stopped only when she heard the front door open. Blake was home and she was ready to beg for his mercy. But mercy was not forthcoming from Blake that day, and honestly, she didn't expect it. She didn't expect it would be. At least not immediately, but now it seemed not ever. She rolled on her side, wondering how on earth she found herself in such a position. Hold on, y'all. With Larry Canati, to the point where he was now added to her wall of shame after working alongside him for almost 17 months. Why didn't I heed the warning signs? Did I have some kind of schoolgirl crush on him? Did I lead him on? Did I secretly want him? 10 years her senior, she and Larry had hit it off from the day she had started working at Pelicha Worldwide All Suite Hotel, a luxurious golf and spa resort with the head office located on the outskirts of Orlando. He was vice president of human resources, and he had initially hired her as the human resources manager. She was in that position a little over a year, and when the human resources director resigned, Larry immediately promoted her to that position after convincing her she was a great fit for the position and he would be on hand if she had ever needed help. On the day of the incident, Larry had passed by her office that morning, and she had told him she was behind with her part of the presentation for the board meeting, which was happening in 2 days. Larry volunteered to assist her after work. Nothing strange. They had worked late a couple of times to run over presentations, discuss policy changes, or to sort out work related issues. What was strange, though, was as Larry stood talking with her that morning, she had found herself wondering what he was like at home. Their relationship had been pretty much professional. She remembered even staring at him a little longer than was considered appropriate, and perhaps, for the first time, noticed he was a fine-looking 45-year-old. His naturally sun-kissed complexion glowed with vitality. He was all male, physically appealing, tall, and lean. His clean-shaven face, highlighted by miniature dimples from a drop-dead gorgeous smile, reflected his bold personality and freedom of spirit. He always seemed indomitable, comfortable in any environment, and it was fascinating to watch him navigate the political arena at work. Later that evening, Larry sat across from her. Y'all, I've asked my fam not to write me while I'm recording this vid, but they're writing me anyway. Gotta love them. Gotta love them. It's alright though. Later that evening, Larry sat across from her, working on a part of the presentation on his laptop while she sat at her desk, working on her desktop. She walked to the whiteboard hanging on the wall in her office. I'm seeing where we can cut a bit more costs, she told him, looking at the organizational chart for the newly reorganized advertising division. Let's merge the positions of Deputy Vice President of Advertising and Manager of Advertising and call the new position Senior Manager of Advertising. Larry drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair, then joined her at the whiteboard to inspect the organizational chart. Love it. That should give us another check mark with the board, she said, while massaging her aching temples with her fingers. He smiled at her, taking in her tired eyes. You need to relax, Gabrielle, he said, touching her shoulder. You should take off your shoes. My shoes? Why? She couldn't quite interpret his gaze. Was that care in his eyes? Get comfy, he said nonchalantly. We have another hour or so before we leave. She sighed. That may be a good idea. She placed a hand on the whiteboard and almost fell over trying to get out of her pumps. Larry steadied her. Here, let me help you. Dropping to his knees, he held onto one of her ankles. Oh, okay, she muttered, grabbing his shoulders and wiggling one foot and then the next to help him remove her shoes. He took his time to remove her shoes before standing. There, that should help, Shorty. She grinned at him. Thanks, feeling better already. Did you call me Shorty? He chuckled as he moved back to his seat. I sure did. She smiled at him. I'm going to forgive you. She stood at 5 feet 6 inches, but he towered above her at over 6 feet. His mouth curled in a smile as he removed his tie and threw it on his jacket, which was resting on the chair beside him. Please, his eyes fastened on her body as she removed her jacket, exposing her silky red inner blouse neatly tucked in her shirt. Forgive me, he continued, his eyes now resting on his laptop screen. Smiling, she slid in her chair and was quiet for a moment, clicking away on her desktop. A few minutes later, she stretched her hands above her head and announced, I'm finished with this part. Great, Larry pinned her with his gaze, then his eyes became fixated on her chest. You have a nice cleavage, he stated matter of factly, as if he had complimented her about her hair. That was just so inappropriate right there. It really was. Blushing, she lowered her arms. She had hoped that it was only her imagination when she saw him staring at her chest. We're tired. Let's finish up tomorrow. Larry knitted his brows. Come on, Gabrielle. You're married, so am I, but that doesn't mean I can't admire a nice body when I see one. Yes, it does. That's exactly what it means. She nibbled on her lips, as she always did when she was pondering. She didn't want him to feel bad for complimenting her. Thanks, she said quietly. We need a break, he said, sliding out of his chair and opening the small refrigerator in the corner of her office. He motioned for her to join him at the small conference table nearby. All work and no play makes Gabby a dull girl. Hold on, y'all. I'm about to pause it for a minute because I want to take some notes. Smiling, she took her seat before him and sipped on a can of Mountain Dew he had placed on the table. Just what I needed, thanks. He flashed her a triumphant smile, deepening his dimples. You're welcome. She fought the urge to hold his lingering gaze, but failed. He looked great, a fine specimen of a man. Her eyes roamed him up and down, taking in his raw masculinity. Why am I admiring Larry Canati? She shook her head slightly, then took another sip of her drink. I must be tired, she rationalized. Can't wait for Blake to get back, huh? Larry drawled teasingly. The warmth in his voice shot enjoyable tingles down her spine, and she lowered her gaze, her confused senses threatening to derail her composure. Yup, he'll be back in 2 weeks. Larry eyed her. Are you okay? You haven't been yourself all day. She sighed, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm okay. I just miss my Aunt Jean. I could talk with her about anything. Life happens, he told her, but we know that God is good. He's working everything out for your good. He knew that Aunt Jean was laid to rest 2 months ago, and she was like a mother to Gabrielle. Whatever was bothering her, he was sure she would have talked with Aunt Jean about it. Yes, God is good, she agreed, mopping her eyes with a napkin from the table. Do you want to talk about it? Not really, but thanks for asking. I know exactly what you need, Larry said, feeling an overwhelming need to comfort her. He slid out of his chair and stood behind her. A massage. Her brows shot up. A massage? I'm good at this, he countered, kneading her shoulders with both hands. Out of reflex, she jumped, grabbing his hands. Just relax. Think nice thoughts about Blake, he offered, and she relaxed. He continued to gently massage her shoulder and move to her neck. You have a tight knot at the base of your neck, he mentioned, keeping his voice impersonal. She let out a long sigh, closing her eyes at his hands as his hands traveled the length of her neck, applying deep pressure. His hands moved to her back and she tensed slightly. Relax, he said softly, and she did. Gosh, I miss Blake. I hope we can get past this bump in the road quickly. Why wasn't I honest with him before he found out so callously that I wasn't ready to have a child? Then, before he left for Atlanta, we would have made love and all would be well. Passionate love. Larry gazed at Gabrielle's slightly parted lips, and heat seared through his body. Whatever she was thinking about was causing her to breathe a little heavier. Feeling as if he was committing emotional adultery, he closed his eyes, trying to recall a scripture to his mind. At that same moment, an inner voice warned him to stop flirting with temptation. He opened his eyes and then bit his lips to steady himself when he realized his hands had taken a mind of their own and was gently massaging her sides. She said, arching her chest. He watched her respond to his touch, and he liked that. She made him feel needed, and his fingers caressed the base of her breast with exceeding tenderness. Deliberately, teasingly, she shivered. Emboldened by her reaction, he cupped her breast, and then moaned loudly as his hands melted into their softness. Larry, she flew out of the chair, hugging her chest with her hands. He followed her closely, then stepped back as she leaned against the wall. For a moment he gazed at her, and the only thing he could think about was her thirst for her. Was his thirst for her. All of her. An inner voice begged him to desist, but his flesh craved her, needed her, and he had no doubt that he would have her. You feel so good, he drawled huskily, his eyes glistening with desire. She placed her hands on his chest as he leaned towards her. We shouldn't. Larry gazed at her for a second before brushing his lips against hers. We both need this, he said without hesitation, his mouth temptingly close. On their own volition, her lips parted invitingly, and he eagerly captured her mouth with his, trembling at the velvety smoothness of her lips. Her eyes fluttered shut, and she shivered, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as his lips traveled the length of her neck, dropping soft kisses along the way. Just when she could take no more, he lifted his head, his lips hovering above hers. Absolutely love your lips, he gushed. She could feel the heat of his breath on her face as she surveyed his lush mouth, his lips beckoning seductively to her. We shouldn't, she offered, weakly, mesmerized by the aura of his charisma. Struggling to restrain himself, he silenced her objection by kissing her again, passionately, urgently, and with the confidence of a man who knew what he wanted. Clutching his shoulders for strength, she returned his kiss with more fire than he imagined she would, and his body melted against hers. When he was finally able to pull back, they were both breathing heavily. I need you, he whispered, barely able to contain himself. Their bodies inched apart. He looked into her yearning eyes, then brought her hand to his mouth and lightly kissed her knuckles, his warm breath stroking her chin. He released her hand and they stood there, drinking in each other. She swallowed hard, mumbling, we need to stop. He wanted to stop. If only he could tear his eyes away from her lips. Maybe just this once, he asked, his chest heaving in breathless anticipation. The seconds dragged by as Larry waited for her response. When none came, he turned away from her. She pushed out a gagged breath. Despite all that just occurred between them, she had to let him know that they should not ever go down that path again. Larry, she called out, her voice faint. She was still reeling from the surge of warm, delightful sensations in her body. In a flash, he swept her into his arms, his body crushing hers. Your body feels amazing, he said, smiling slightly. Mercy, I need to fix this quickly. Thanks, she said softly, nibbling on her lips. He admired the beautiful pout of her mouth, then watched fascinatingly as her lips parted, and she began to speak. Larry, we can't. Before she could catch her next breath, Larry eagerly and hungrily covered her lips with his. As desire welled up in him, he paused, unsure whether he had her permission to proceed. She arched closer to him, mumbling, let's talk about this. As a wave of heat enveloped their bodies, then she froze, her mind screaming, no, no, please don't, as he lifted her skirt. This is not happening, not again. But she felt powerless to stop him. She heard herself whimper, let's not, but he was too far gone. He intended to have her, with or without her consent. She vaguely remembered hearing her whisper, I won't hurt you. But she definitely recalled praying it would be over quickly. And it was. A few minutes later, he buried his head in her neck, muttering, thank you, thank you. She was grateful that Larry had pulled away when her tears hit his face. She heard him mumble, are you all right? But she didn't utter a word. Instead, she swiftly pulled down her skirt, retrieved her underwear from the floor, then grabbed her purse from the desk drawer before bolting through the office door. And if she had the physical strength, she would have run 3 miles barefooted all the way home. Running seemed to be the ideal thing to do in that moment. Running from Larry, running from herself, and definitely running from her past. That night, she knew she had to stop running from the ghost of her past, but she didn't know how to, so she picked up more speed, fearing that she couldn't deal with the truth about her life. Y'all, I feel like this book is really going to bless me because I can really relate to Gabrielle right now. And by morning, she convinced herself that the skeletons, okay, another ad. Sorry about that, y'all. And by morning, she convinced herself that the skeletons of her past and current situations needed to remain hidden, and all she needed to do was go on living from day to day. The heavy drumming of the rain on the window pane brought Gabrielle back to the present. The gloomy weather seemed to reflect her mood, dreary and sorrowful. She shook her head vigorously, attempting to get rid of the overwhelming feeling of doom and gloom. But instead, she unleashed the flood of tears she had been suppressing since she woke that morning. She wished her separation from Blake was only a nightmare. At least then she would wake up and return to her normal life. A normal life. Now that's a stretch, an unreachable goal. Let me pause this. Her normal life would include Blake. Plagued with doubts, she mopped her tear-dampened cheeks with tissue from a box on the nightstand, then sat up, cross-legged on the bed. I'm not punishing myself anymore. This experience is teaching me exactly what is in me. I must focus on my future with Blake. I miss him so much, Lord, she murmured, her cheeks warmed from her memories of him. She vaulted from the bed and yelled, Thank you, Lord, for the victory in my situation. As she headed to the laundry area for a second time, I am an overcomer, she declared. My best days are still in front of me. She dropped the laundry basket on the beige colored ceramic tile floor near the washing machine. Yes, they are, she reaffirmed. A small smile played across her face as she dumped the dirty clothes in the washing machine. At least my therapist and the members of my prayer circle think so. Despite the frustration and uncertainty that sometimes welled up within her, she was determined to press through the consequences of her action. And on the not so great days, she had a few scriptures lined up. Today she recalled Isaiah 49, verses 15 through 16. Can a mother forget the baby at her breast and have no compassion on the child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Well, y'all, we just read the prologue and chapter 1 together. It is obvious that Larry took advantage of Gabby in her weak emotional state. Well, y'all, I feel like, this book is really going to bless me and maybe even free me in some areas because already I feel like I'm relating to Gabby. But I love y'all and I will see y'all in my review.